All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, FCM community. This is Mike and Maddie here for your postseason preview podcast. The plan is more or less just going to go through and give our predictions for how we think that the playoffs here, as we are set on the precipice of having them, is going to go. Maybe we'll dabble slightly into some off-season predictions. I know I have one semi-spicy one ready to go, and just general musings about how the season went, where we think teams are moving forward, divisions, etc. Um, and we'll try to wrap it up in just about 3.5 hours, as our normal podcast lengths usually go. So, without further ado, we will start in the American League East, which is the place we always start in. And that's just because we feel like it. So, um, in the American League East this year, we have one team making the playoffs. That was the Boston Red Sox. Um, Coming back from behind, honestly, to overtake Montreal the last couple months of the season, and then take the division by a pretty comfortable margin, 5 games. So, interesting team there. The Red Sox out of the East. In the Central, we have a 3-team playoff. Um, Makers with Kansas City taking the division, with Detroit and Cleveland pulling up next with wild card spots, and then Houston, of course, taking the American League West. So, in the American League, we have the Royals, who will take on the Tigers or Indians, whoever wins that series. Um, followed followed by Houston and the Red Sox in the other series. So, um, as far as the wild card game goes, I'm gonna go with Tigers. So I think the Tigers are gonna win um, over the Indians in the wild card game to go on and lose to the Royals in 4 games. On the other side, I'm going to take the Red Sox over the Astros in 4 games. Nothing against the Astros. There's nothing to do with it. They're my division. It's just that Fred has been here before and done this recently. Astros have not seen the playoffs for quite a while. And for some reason, I always think the Mogul has a little bit of something to do with that. I think they like teams that have been there more recently. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not. That's just the way I see it. Then I have the Royals beating the Red Sox to go on to the World Series. So Royals to the World Series from the American League. Maddie, let's hear from you first. What do you have for your games?
Well, I think it's very fitting that someone would come from behind to overtake Gilly in the Expos just the way he would like it. He would just probably prefer that they were 17. So in the wild card game, yeah, Detroit, because Cleveland's just been kind of falling off lately. So I'm going to go Detroit has the mojo, even though that really doesn't work or make sense in the Mogul playoffs. But we're going to say this time it does. So we would have that Kansas City and Detroit matchup. I'm gonna go Detroit. Detroit just takes Kansas City to the woodshed there, just because that's the way Mogul likes to do it. You have that. It's like, oh yeah, this team is gonna rock out with their cock out in the playoffs, and it just doesn't happen. You have Boston and Houston. Now, fuck the whole Mogul likes teams that have been there before, because when Boston, did they win it all? Yeah, they won it all a little bit ago. It was like they haven't been there for a while. Nothing was really established about them, but they just did their thing. So I think that's where Houston's just going to do their thing and overtake Boston. And then we have Detroit and Houston in the championship series. And I'll go with Houston advances on to represent the shitty AL West in the World Series.
Mike, what do you got?
So I'm actually going to take Cleveland over Detroit. Um, just looking at the teams, I don't know. I think Cleveland's probably going to throw Kevin Andrew, who pitched his ass off. And a lot of it will depend on who Detroit throws, but they got a few injuries. And considering it's the wild card game, they're going to be without Hagan and Krasny and Henderson, who all have multiple day injuries. And then I don't know if there's a day off, but Muscat might be injured as well as Jeff Nelson. So they're going to have to decide. I'm guessing they'll throw, I guess it's Macklemore. But again, I just with those injuries, I think Cleveland takes the wild card game. They go on to play Kansas City, who I think is too much for them, just matchup-wise, offensive and pitching, although Cleveland does hit left-handed pitching well, which is a lot of what Kansas City has, but I think Kansas City takes that matchup. In the other matchup, I think Houston's offense might not quite be quite as good as Fred's, although they outscored him during the season. But Houston's pitching is far superior to Fred's, so I'm going to take Houston in that matchup for Kansas City versus Houston championship series, and I'm going to stick with my preseason pick and take Kansas City to make it to the World Series.
All right, moving on to the NL. In the NL, I do believe we have a play-in game for the division with Philadelphia and Washington. So that will be interesting. Philadelphia obviously coming out hot at the end of the season and knocking Peter off his presumed safe pedestal there down the road. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. It looks like Philadelphia has most of their best pitchers that have already pitched. Down the road toward the end of the year there. So Washington might have an advantage there. Let's look real quick. Yeah, Laughlin's ready to go. So my guess is that Washington takes that one game play-in, forcing Philadelphia to move over and into the wild card game against the Brewers. If that be the case, I think the Brewers take it. And the Brewers go on to face the Cubs. Cubs, maybe a bit of a surprise team for some this year. I know early in the season, Andy said, "Don't be surprised when the Cubs do really well," and lo and behold, the Cubs did very well. So I think a Cubs Brewers first round matchup would be just probably the best possible matchup. Two teams that won 105 plus games, both of whom just look very talented. Could be a very interesting matchup to have to see kind of who comes out on top on that one. I will give a slight edge to Chicago, just because, for no apparent reason, honestly. Just we'll go Chicago in that one, and then we would have Washington versus the Giants in the other matchup, and I would take the Giants in that one. So Giants and Cubs in the NLCS with Cubs beating the Giants and going on to face Kansas City in a matchup that I think many people might want to see. I know I myself would love to see that matchup, G Money versus Jason. So that is who I'm going to take. I'm going to take the Cubs all the way on to face the Royals. So, Mike, let's start with you this time. Who do you see in the NL?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. It's hard to pick against Lee motherfucking Laughlin in the wild card game. The guy is a beast, but you always got the apprehension when it comes to Peter in the wild card games, or even I guess playing game wild card games. He just seems to have the worst luck. But I'm going to go with Washington to win the playing game and take the division. And then, unfortunately for Dave, he matches up to Milwaukee, who's had the second best record in the NL. So I got J Main taking that to have that Brewers Milwaukee matchup. And then San Francisco versus Washington. I think Cheeto catches a break here with Laughlin having to throw in the play-in game, where he doesn't necessarily see him game one. So I think that pitching sets up nice for Cheeto. I know Peter's still got a couple horses. Another thing that will depend on if Cheeto's guys are back, because I know he had a few injuries. Looks like his shortstop is out for 22 days, so he's going to have to overcome that. But he can play Cantrell there, even though Cantrell's been horrible with the glove. So I guess it'll determine how well he can handle losing his shortstop for the foreseeable future. Because Peter seems pretty healthy. So I'm still going to pick Cheeto there because I picked him in the preseason pod. I got Milwaukee over Chicago just on pitching. And then I have San Francisco beating Milwaukee to go to the World Series.
Matty.
Well. San Francisco didn't need anything at the deadline. That's kind of interesting right now. Anyways, Philadelphia and Washington. Yeah, I think Washington takes it, and then Washington's forced into that wild card game against Milwaukee, which I think Milwaukee probably easily takes. Bye Philly. Thanks for playing. Then it lines up for the crazy matchup. It's where the seeding in baseball playoffs and mogul works is just kind of stupid. They're gonna have the two best records facing off against each other in the divisional round. And I do like Milwaukee in this over Chicago just because it's Jason and he doesn't get nice things. Then you have San Francisco and Washington. Now I have to go back and really look at this in depth in the chat and see, has Peter ever talked shit about Cheeto recently? If he did, well, San Francisco's going to sweep the Nationals and it's just not going to matter. But even if he hasn't, I'm still going to say San Francisco beats Washington. It's just going to be a mogul thing. And then it'll be Milwaukee and the Giants. And again, a mogul thing will go with the Giants. The Giants prevail. They go the distance. They played in that very, very tough National League West. I mean, they had to overcome a lot of very, very moderate to okay to decent teams. That is really tough to do. So, Giants are your National League champion.
All right. Well, and in the World Series, so for me, I have the Royals versus the Cubs, and I have the Royals coming out on top in a one of those squeaky seventh gamer kind of fashion. So I have the Royals over the Cubs for my World Series pick. Maddie, who do you have?
So I had Houston and San Francisco. Houston in 5 games.
All right, and Mike.
I have the Royals and the Giants, and I have the Royals taking it in 6.
All right.
I mean, sorry, Giants. Correction. Giants taking it in 6, not the Royals.
Okay. Well, I was about to say we all took AL teams, which means the NL is going to win this year, but that was not the case. One of us switched it up at the last second, so we're safe on that. So now here's a quick question, Mike. I know you said you went back and kind of listened to the preseason pod. How close were we on our predictions?
All right. So in the AL, you had the Red Sox winning, which was correct. You had Kansas City, Houston, and you had Detroit and Montreal as the wild cards. So all you
Oh,
missed was
damn
Cleveland.
close.
I had the Red Sox, Kansas City, and Houston, but I had Seattle and Montreal as my wild cards, which were both misses. And then in the NL, we both had San Francisco. We both picked Arizona as the wild card. We both picked Milwaukee to win the division, which we were both incorrect. I correctly predicted the Cubs to make the playoffs. You picked St. Louis. And then we both picked Washington to win the East. And I quote, you put, if Peter doesn't win this division, he should hang up his cleats. Something has gone terribly wrong. So hopefully he pulls out that play-in game because otherwise he's going to have to hang up his cleats. Because we were both in agreement that they should run away with that division. So that's who we picked in the preseason pod. You picked the Royals over Washington to win the World Series, and I picked the Giants over the Royals in the World Series, which is why I didn't change my prediction because it could still happen. So that's how that played out. Preseason pod.
Look at that. Look at how good I am. I almost nailed that prediction. I mean, good God. Amazing am I. All right, so again, real brief, real quick, everybody. That is our predictions. I believe Poldy and Hokey, and then the Hokey Hay Pod the other day had their predictions as well. I was taking my kids to school, and I got to that part, and for some reason, it wouldn't just let me stop and re-listen to it, so I gave up. But we have a couple of things we want to do tonight. Again, we do actually plan on keeping this relatively brief tonight. I know Maddie has something for us. Before we want to get into that, I want to just ask it again, a little bit off the cuff for maybe Maddox. I don't think I prepped him on this one. Any surprises do we see this offseason? Obviously we still have the playoffs to go and re-signings and all that usual crap. Are there any teams that we think are going to fall greatly off of what they've been doing either the last couple seasons or even this past year? Are there any teams up and coming that we think are really going to start to make that turn that's starting even this offseason? So I know for me, the one that I'm most interested in watching is Montreal. Montreal has been a playoff team or borderline playoff team in the last few years. They're, signaling a retool for this offseason. So I'm curious to see how that goes. I know they have a lot of players that are contracts are expiring. I know they're way over budget. I know they have a lot of guys that they don't want to move. Some guys they might want to try to move. I think that is the team that I'm going to be most interested to see on what he does. Doesn't have any real chips to use to add other than maybe trying to buy some guys in free agency and run that payroll back up after he shaves some off. So very curious to see kind of how that goes this offseason for him. I know he floated down, says he has a deal in place. We'll see what happens there. My guess is he really ends up focusing on moving some of those guys that he doesn't want to pay anymore, and then trying to get different guys in instead. So I just have a feeling like he's gonna project to have all these moves, and in the end of the day, make almost none. So I'm very interested to see about that. I think he's going to run into a similar problem that you ran into, Mike. Is that he's going to have all these guys that he traded for that now he wants to move on from, and being in your case it was the right move, but rightly so. Wanted to get out of them what he put into them, and I have a feeling like a lot of the guys that Gilly has that he might want to trade. Like I don't foresee a big market for some of those guys. So I think that's going to really hamstring him as he tries to flip that roster around a little bit. Um, the rest of the East, I think, stays about the same. I think Boston's, proven that, for as much as people don't understand, Fred's doesn't trade, drafts, just kind of does his thing. It's worked very well for him the last few years. I don't see any other changes really out there. I think New York, Baltimore, Toronto, they're all still pretty deep in a rebuild. They're not coming out anytime soon. Central's going to be interesting to watch. I think Kansas City and Detroit remain strong. As Chicago, clearly, I think still in the rebuild, not really going to make too much of a change there. Minnesota's still a few years off. Though, let's be fair, some of the guys that Minnesota has, depending on how they age over the offseason, maybe there's a little bit of room for improvement there. I mean, there's clearly room for improvement, but, I think the big team in that division will watch Cleveland to see what they do. Does Cleveland continue to add, to push the envelope? Does Cleveland do a little retool, kind of move some things around and try to do something a little bit different? Very interested to see what Dan does out there in Cleveland. The West, the Wild Wild West, the Wild Wild West. It will be interesting to see. Houston clearly won the division this year. It was quite a good team, young still. Seattle was still there up until the end, and LA wasn't too far off the pace either. So it'll be interesting to see if Matty out in LA decides to, you know, rebuild or try to put some puzzle pieces together and see if he can contend and make that a three-team race out in the West, which has not had a three-team race in a long while. Texas is clearly going into a rebuild. There's not much to do out there with them. Oakland's interesting. A lot of good players, a lot of young players, a couple of aging guys, but Doug doesn't do a lot of moves. And he definitely, I believe, his star pitcher took a couple hits this year right across the chest. I think he had a double drop. So that might spell disaster long term out in Oakland. So that'll be interesting to see. Do you guys have anything in the AL that you're seeing for this offseason that might be some interesting storylines or some made up shit, like I said?
Well, I'm gonna go with this in the East. I think Baltimore's gonna do some things enough to maybe finally get that hump and get over to third place. I think they'll do that, and that'll make someone else in the East very, very happy. They doesn't have to bring about those points that were just very, very stupid. In the Central, probably about the same. I would say Cleveland's kind of an interesting thing. Dan kind of sold out some pieces to get this run, and it's down to the playoffs. What that's going to do, we'll see soon enough. In the West, I would say it's probably going to be about the same. I don't see anyone doing anything that's going to be major to change the course as of right now. Um, Maybe War Priest will try and make some additions to get himself up in the fourth or maybe even third place. But nothing to really matter.
So for me, obviously, yeah, Montreal is one to watch. I mean, Gilly's got some big contracts coming off the books as far as Goodrich and Arias. I'll be interested to see how big his stones are as to whether or not he attaches comps to them. I mean, Goodrich may be a good one to comp, but he is 32. Arias is 33. So it'll be interesting to see if he ties a draft pick to those and whether or not somebody's willing to or not. So he will have a little bit of flexibility with his payroll, but realistically, I don't know that he has the horses in his rotation or in the pen. His closer Woods is declining, and he's paying him $17 million a year. And without picks, already traded his picks. I mean, he traded his picks 4 minutes after they were available for Ben Cool. Maybe he can find a taker and he can flip some of these guys. I mean, Cool probably still has value. His Asian center fielder is declining, but probably still has value where he is as a 93 contact speed. So, but he doesn't have a lot of cash, and he's already $18 million over. So it'll be interesting to see which way that goes because he doesn't have a lot of cash to add a bunch of free agents and go over his payroll because he'll end up being in the negative. Yeah, and like you said, Miss, he's kind of in the same position I was. Although I think I sold my guys. It'll be interesting to see if Gilly sells his guys. I know he's talking about Bob Downs already heading out of town. So his window may have been like 2 seasons in the playoffs, and now it's over. He didn't get his ring last year, and that might be it. Fred's team's pretty solid. They're pretty young. Obviously, Fred has a nice payroll that he can pay his guys. I agree with Maddie, though. Baltimore, they got some great pieces. I mean, Paul Brown looks like a stud. They got a couple other power hitters. If he can find pitching like they found in Houston, I mean, they could be kind of the second coming of the Astros. New York and Hockey and Toronto are probably a little further away, especially Toronto. New York's got some good pieces, but they're pretty far away in the rebuild as well. So I think that division's probably going to be Boston's. Gilly might be able to do something about it if he's able to figure out a way to retool or add a couple pieces. But realistically, Boston doesn't have to do much, and they can keep their same team together. And Fred could even add if he wanted to. In the Central, Detroit's pitching staff is hanging around with Old Wiseman in Cleveland. My fear there would be if he sells out his last couple pieces, he really has nothing left in the cupboard. And does that get him over the top in that division? I don't know. He hung around a while this year, but I don't know that adding even gets him over Kansas City unless it's something substantial. He'd really have to sell everything he had left, and then if it doesn't work, he'd be looking at a Minnesota type rebuild. I got a feeling my team's going to be pretty bad. Dunmeyer's a free agent, so he's probably going to go to free agency and get a ton of money from somebody. And then I got Villarreal and Cox who are on the block and can be moved. But realistically, it's time in Chicago to start waiting for the young guys to get ready and start bringing them up. Pulte's got a nice team, lots of talent. The key there will be when does he start bringing guys up? When does he start adding to that mix? I think Houston's going to be a juggernaut for a while. Miz is a team that I'm keeping an eye on because I want to see what he does. Does he retool? Does he rebuild? Which I know that's a dirty word for Miz, so he's probably not going to rebuild. He'll probably retool. Maddie's got Los Angeles headed in his Maddie direction, so I'm sure they'll be competing here in no time. Poor Doug, his pitchers seem to be declining right as his offense is sort of rising, although he does have a couple nice young pitchers on the farm. And Texas is headed for what I believe to be a Minnesota Twin-like rebuild because their farm is pretty barren and their major league roster isn't much better. Although they do have Correa. Bartolot looks like he started to decline. Brinson, I mean, they might get a few things, but there's not a whole lot that they're going to be able to get as far as assets. Correa will probably bring something back if they can find a buyer, but the rest of it's kind of ugly for adding to what they have. So long rebuild there. The three teams I'd keep an eye on are Montreal, Cleveland, and Seattle.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I feel like I should point out that we keep talking about the Minnesota-like rebuild for Texas when they have the Minnesota GM as their co-GM. War Priest has shown in the past to have to just miss on his timing, and I think bringing Mass in um, kind of helped push that bad timing one step further because they definitely added a whole bunch last year, and I think a little bit the year before to no avail. So yeah, rough days ahead for Texas. Unfortunately, I hope that they pull out of it. Fortunately, War Priest is a pretty darn good drafter, so I think there's a little bit there. So, yeah, Montreal does have a lot of salary coming out of the books. I think that's a really good point. It'll be really interesting to see that comp pick gamble there. Do you play Russian roulette and comp some of those guys? Presumably because you think they're going to go. Heaven forbid one or two of them don't go. That could cause a big issue. And on top of that, Gilly has his stadium payment due as well, so he'll need to generate about 30 some odd $1 million from somewhere between now and the end of free agency. So wouldn't be surprised if he does another what he did a couple years ago and sells one of those peak players for a big chunk of change, like he did to Arizona. To kind of make his nut for that payment. So interesting things to see out there in the East. And you're right, AL in general, not too much probably going to change, but a couple interesting things to pay attention to. Out in the National League, I think this is where we really get to see some interesting stuff going on. Obviously, Washington's probably not going anywhere unless Peter all of a sudden starts selling his good guys and not just trying to sell his crap guys for good prices. I don't think that he goes anywhere. I think he has probably plenty of budgets to play with, plenty of things to do, plenty of cash. Good God, he's not going to go anywhere. He'll do what he needs to do. He'll add through free agency. See if he can't rip off a person or two in trade and just move on with his offseason. Philadelphia is the one out there in the East that I'm most interested to see. Dave really came on strong at the end there. Will he build on that? Obviously, he's got a pretty good rotation set. His lineup ended up being a lot better than I thought it was going to be at the start of the season, even at the midseason point. Does he add to that? Does he kind of hold pat with his trades, obviously, but maybe add through free agency with a couple of smart signings? I mean, let's be honest. Is he a guy that if Goodrich goes to free agency, he picks up real quick to throw at his first base to really give him that extra boost in the middle of the lineup to make him a much more dominant looking team? Florida, it'll be interesting to see. I know High Heat had signaled a bit of a rebuild or a retool, I believe he might have called it. So it'll be interesting to see which way Florida goes. I don't see them adding much. So it's more of what do they end up trading if they end up trading some of those things. Atlanta's still a year or two away. New York is a team that I just perplexes me something awful. Like they always seem like they should have a pretty solid team. And they just never quite put it together. But they have some young guys. Obviously, Lasu was up this year, looked really good. They're a young shortstop. They got a guy, Wayne Robertson, who's probably going to be playing next year, one would think. And a couple of their younger guys there as well in the minors that are on the cusp of playing. Maybe you push and let them start early. I'm not sure if Jason Silverstein's ready yet, but who knows? Maybe we see him at some point next year. I think they're the team in the East that's about to turn the corner. I mean, I think they have some good young pitchers that should be playing probably to start next year and some good hitters coming up. They're a team that if they don't make the jump next year, they're poised to make it the year after. So I'd really watch the Mets in the next year or two. In the Central, I see things to be about the same. I am always watching GB, no matter what team he has, no matter which Central he's in. So I think Chicago is probably here to stay. I don't think Milwaukee's going anywhere. St. Louis is going to continue to plug along, take shots from Peter, and get boosted up by me. But Pittsburgh's the one team that I would watch out for. They have, again, some young players that should be getting ready soon, if not next season, season after. And just the way the GP drafts, I mean, it's just a matter of time before some of those guys start hitting and he starts playing. So Pittsburgh's the team on my watch list over the next few seasons. The West, the team in the West that interests me the most is Ren out there in Arizona. Ren, thought he had his team set and ready to go. I thought Ren had his team set and ready to go, and just a couple things fell just short and fell apart, and he still made a run of it at the end. He still put full steam ahead at the end there to really make a run at it. So it'll be interesting to see what he does out there. Obviously, he has the reigning MVP. And Anzar, who hit 51 home runs this year, which is crazy. And plenty of power up and down that lineup. I mean, almost everybody in his lineup hit 20 home runs. Everybody hit 12. I mean, those are crazy numbers that you want to see out of your lineup. I think his pitching is still what's holding him back. And I don't see a lot of help in the minors. So, is there a pitcher or two that he finds in free agency that really puts him over the top? With the amount of money that he has to spend, I could see it. I could see him finding that pitcher somewhere, or finding a decent trade somewhere where he can get a good pitcher um, to add to that rotation, or really be that final thing that he needs to kind of push him up and over some other people. So I think Arizona is going to start giving San Francisco quite a heavy run for their money. And San Francisco's not going anywhere either. They have a couple of young cats that should be up and playing pretty soon. That really will just be a nice boost to them. San Diego is a team that I'm also keeping my eye on. If I'm picking a team in each division, keep my eye on. San Diego's that one. I don't think Percy's quite there yet, but I really like the way that he's been drafting of late. And he's got it. He could add a piece or two and make a little bit of noise, not necessarily World Series noise, but a little bit of noise out in that division. SXR, who knows what he's going to do? I mean, he's another team that I think has a bunch of talent in it, but just hasn't played together. So, not sure if he tears it down, goes full rebuild. Not quite his style. I don't think he'll do that. But if he did, that could change a lot of things. I think in both leagues. So it'll be interesting to see. In Colorado, got over that hump, got 51 wins. We'll see how many they get next year. I would not be surprised to see Cad put some money in free agency just to stay above that Mendoza line that we have set as is. So, Mike, what do you have out there in the NL? Anything special? Anything you're watching?
Uh, Definitely the Mets. The Mets just keep coming up. I mean, they have so much talent on their farm. Deck, wanted to say go to Florida and figure out what High Heat wants for Bully to put him at the top of the rotation. I mean, he could essentially buy any player that he wants from any of these selling teams, and New York could really be a juggernaut going forward. I don't love paying Rosser $30 million a year, but he only has to do it for another year, even though it looks like Rosser is really starting his decline. But I think, like I said, if you could add Bully from Florida to the top of that rotation, Bullivant, with who he has coming up, I mean, theoretically, he's got enough bullets to sell off a couple of his young pitchers and add a top notch ace like that and not miss a beat. Or he could add somebody, a top level closer, if he wanted to, if somebody's selling. His lineup, again, like you said, Robertson, um, Pednialp, whatever you want to call it. Some of these names are quite ridiculous, but he's got a lot of good hitters, righties, lefties, Silverstein, Wheatley. I mean, if he wanted to dip into the bank and add a couple huge pieces, I think he really has the opportunity to make that team quite good and at least shake Peter's tree a little bit. Unfortunately for Dave, again, it just depends on if he wants to sell out. If he wants to go for it and get rid of all of his assets, he's got a few that he can add a piece. I mean, he gave away a lot to get talent, which I think made a good difference. He's a nice young catcher. And when you pair him with Peak and Aluzo and Jones, I mean, he's got a nice nucleus in the lineup. It's just there's a lot of holes. His rotation is top notch. His bullpen is okay. And so the question is, does he want to sell whatever bullets he has left to try to make that final push? And is it going to be enough to beat Peter? I mean, he tied Peter this season, so it's always possible. But eventually that Washington team is probably going to play like they should, and they're going to have a year where they run away with it. In the Central, I agree with you. Chicago looks like a tough team that they'll be around for a few years. J-Main always seems to keep Milwaukee relevant. This year was GD's year to suck in St. Louis, so next year it means he'll compete because he seems to go every other year where he disappoints when we think he's the favorite, and next year he competes for the division. Like you said, GB's got a lot of talent in Pittsburgh. I feel bad for Theo. I have a feeling Cincinnati's going to be beat up on by those four teams for the foreseeable future because Theo probably has quite a extensive rebuild ahead of him with the declining talent that he has. For his sake, I hope he can get something for Crosby, get something for Sism, get something out of those guys so he can replenish the farm. Rose, I don't even see Rose. Is he on the DL? Yep. Get something for Rose if he can. I mean, he's really got to start selling pieces and trying to get assets where he can because unfortunately this team is declining. If he doesn't, it's going to be a long rebuild. I agree with you on Ren too. I think Ren falls into the the Philadelphia mantra, right? Does Ren want to make that final all-in push? Does he want to try to add because his pitching staff just doesn't seem to be enough? Anzar, again, phenomenal season. Do we think anybody here think that he can do that season in and season out? I don't know. The vitals say no, but maybe in Arizona he does. But they definitely need pitchers. Probably an ace. I don't know if Pendle is an ace. I guess they have Tresca, lefty. Again, 4.02 ERA. Arizona's not terrible, but I don't know. They probably need one more big pitcher. Their bullpen is pretty good. Conaway is a not top level closer, but he's a darn good closer. Like you said, SXR has a ton of talent. I mean, he's got guys up and down. He's got my boy Russ Burton at shortstop, stealing 50 bags. He's got some people down on the farm. He's got young pitchers. Carbide Carbajal. McSween is a good closer. Again, I agree with you. Percy is drafting phenomenally, and I think Cat is just got to keep his head above water so he doesn't get hit with a penalty. But he's the path to getting Colorado back to relevance, and hopefully, whenever they get back to relevance, they'll last a little bit longer than they did the last
Maddie,
time.
what do you got for us in the
With that
NL?
Pronounce the guy